I wanted to have a very brief video on what is the mole. We're going to talk more about moles a little bit later on in the course, but I just want you to have a conceptual sense of what do we mean when we say the mole. Many of you have heard of a mole before. You're like, oh yeah, I kind of remember, but you don't have a conceptual sense of what it really is. So again, we've talked about our particles being very tiny. These atoms are incredibly tiny, and there's many, many, many of them. So I'm always dealing with samples that have so many of them that talking about individual atoms is challenging because there's so many of them in even like a little dot on my finger. So they said, oh, let's create a set. That's all a mole is. It's a set. Conceptually, like when we want to talk about eggs, we talk about them in terms of dozens, a set of a dozen. Or paper, we don't talk about, nobody goes to the office supply store and says, I'd like 767 pieces of paper, please, and can you count them all out for me? You say, I want a ream of paper. One of those packs is a ream of paper that has 500 sheets of paper in it. And so we buy paper in sets of reams. We buy pencils in sets called grosses. Well, you can usually get 12 of them at a time, but officially they get sold in packs of 144. So when we're dealing in chemistry, when we want to deal with atoms, we just package them in sets of 6.022 times 10 to the 23 of them, and we call that a mole. So it's just a large set. Now that number is Avogadro's number. We'll go into that in the future. But again, what kind of makes it a little bit more tricky is that when I'm dealing with a mole, I know that there's 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd atoms in that mole, but I don't know how many moles. I don't know exactly what one mole set is because I'd have to count them out, right? I'm not going to count them out. Instead, we tend to use mass. I know how much one atom weighs, and so I can multiply that by 6.022 and say times 10 to the 23rd and figure out how many grams I need to weigh out to get a mole. And that's what we do. So we also will talk soon about something called a molar mass, and a molar mass is saying if you want to get a set, mole, of carbon, weigh out 12.01 grams of it. If you want to get a set of 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd atoms of oxygen, or a mole of oxygen atoms, you would weigh out 16 grams of it. And so we will learn, we're going to use that molar mass an awful lot to try to figure out how to count how many particles in a sample based off of we weigh it, and then we use this molar mass to determine how many particles there are, how many moles we have of a substance. But just conceptually, think of a mole as being a set like a dozen. You can even almost like replace the word mole with dozen in a sentence and kind of see if that conceptually helps you to understand what's going on in a word problem. That's it.